Excellent. And good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session about the new TechData Flash Systems Calculation version 2. So it's a major revision for us, and IBM's Q1 storage quick overview, to be fair. The main focus of this particular session is around the calculator. So today I've got joining with me the champion of champions, Lee McAvoy from IBM. He's going to help me out a few bits if we need any assistance from him. So thank you, Lee. Lee will just chip in. I think you all know Lee. So he's probably spoke to you once or twice here and there over the last couple of years too. Just a quick, I suppose, housekeeping. We do have a chat facility within Zoom. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Or when we get to the end of the session, if you want to unmute yourself and have actually speak to us, absolutely fine with that, but probably best left towards the end of the session if that's okay. But if you do have any questions that you want to just fire in the chat, we'll probably check them at the end, or maybe Lee will have a look at them because I can barely see anything when I'm in presentation mode, if that makes sense to you. So quickly moving on. So our agenda today, quickly going to go for the Q1 announcements. Hopefully you've seen them. If you've not, this will be a whistle-stop tour of what they're all about. And then we'll go into what is really the meat of the call, which is the Flash System Calculator version 2.5. And then because of that, we'll actually we've got a few major additions to the calculator tool. We'll do a little bit around positioning 52 and at 7300, because you'll start to compare the two, which will start to get quite interesting. And then, funny enough, I volunteered for the Ask Mike Lee anything about IBM storage. Whether that's a good idea, you'll see later on in the call. But that's kind of what we're looking at today. So hopefully that's kind of what you're expecting. So Q1 announcements, if you've not seen them, it's all about data resilience. So all about our safeguarded copy offering, that being, I suppose, boosted. IBM are, I suppose, discussing about storage, selling storage, not just talking about storage, but talking about security and resilience too. They think this will really start to uncover a whole world of opportunities for you to have different conversations, say not just about storage, but about security, because let's face it, security is the top of everybody's list these days, especially over the last 2 years. I think most companies, sadly, have been attacked at some point. So it's kind of not when, but if, really. So it's kind of more around that kind of tact. And this particular session, I'm going to mainly focus around the hardware, because we're looking at how we can get to a sweet spot configuration. So I'm not going to go into too much depth around the data resilience piece, but essentially they've created a offering called Cyber Vault, which in effect is a blueprint, which is a number of combination of items such as safeguarded copy, copy services manager, of course, flash systems, and then feeding into that products such as QRadar and IBM Guardium. But then that's not even just tailored just to that. It can actually go beyond that. So we can look at a third-party items, such say if you're running an Oracle database, anything that feeds security information. IBM have a blueprint, and actually use lab services to do that. If you need a copy of the blueprint, I think as a partner, it'd probably quite interesting to read. Let me know. Happy to send it to you. Not a problem. But the hardware news, I suppose, is ones that we're kind of focusing on today. Is the new Flash Systems 95 and 95R, if you like a rack, if you're into that kind of thing, and the 7300 and the new SVC. So each of the Flash systems had the next generation Flash core modules free, and the current 5200s, which we know and love from last year, also have the SCM3s available to you. The idea is that all these systems have had a performance boost, the 95 and the 73, and that we can start to, I suppose, if you have a performant workload, we can actually start to have that on board running on that system, but then add extra features such as safeguarded copy and not impact that workload. That is the kind of one of the purposes around that. So built-in security and resiliency, that's kind of what we're talking about. Improved density, scalability, and connectivity. We'll get to that, but that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of what we're looking at from the new systems. So quickly, the family portrait. 73s and 95s. To give you, I suppose, an idea of how this actually kind of really plays out, you can kind of see the name jumps. So we previously had the 72, we've gone to 73, so it's a little bit of a jump. And then if you look at the flash system 95, we've gone from 92 to 95. So that shows how much of an improvement IBM have put into this. And of course, they all run Spectrum virtualized storage insights as per usual. And everything else pretty much stays the same within the portfolio and no other changes. Okay, so 9500, top of the shop. I think this has actually been nicknamed the Beast, which is, I've seen on a few blogs, which is kind of nice. If you have a look at the announcements, you'll see why. So which is kind of interesting, and it's good to know that the IBM product teams haven't lost their sense of humor. So have a look on that for me, just to amuse yourself slightly. Model numbers, right? So headline news with this: 2 times the connectivity and the performance that really matters. So having that 48 drive slots, that 3 terabyte of cache, and then we've got the 100 gig Ethernet, and then 48 32 gig fiber channel ports. So a hell of a lot of connectivity for you there. So a lot of options for good customers. And say if you need that enterprise workload, let us know. Okay. And of course, we have increased scalability, capacity, port counts. And then I suppose this is kind of usual stuff from what we've seen before, but more enhanced. Being able to have those immutable copies, multi-factor authentication. Again, we've kind of seen this kind of stuff. Encryption, I think the FIPS we had previously had 140.2 from off the top of my head. I think we've now gone to 3. You'd have to be more of a security expert to get to the depth of that, but you can see that IBM are very much so. Sorry, pop-ups. IBM are very much so investing in security and availability as you'd expect. So this is the one that I'd really like to.
Oh, Mike, just one thing on that.
Sure.
On the 9500, it's worth mentioning that the resilience isn't just the software functions and capability. Some people think it looks like it's 2 9200 stuck together and it's an IO group, just one or two IO groups like that. And effectively it isn't. It really is a single flash system 9500. But any 2 of the 4 power supplies are required to drive the entire shop. The boot drives and the batteries are all hot swappable online. So for customers that potentially didn't like the 9200 but would have liked its price and its performance and capability, but they didn't think it was quite razzy enough for them, the 9500, go and have another crack at them because they'll probably like it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mike.
There's some great tech info about what can be hot swapped, and I've got lots of diagrams and stuff. So if you want them, happy to supply them and to chat through them. All good. So it is more razzy as Lee says, which is all good. So 73, evolution rather than revolution, 25% more of the performance that matters. So to have that cyber resiliency play on this system, there's a few numbers that I suppose I want you to kind of take away from this. 25% more performance than previously. But the slide that I particularly like and enjoy is this one here. So it gives you an idea of the performance. So IBM have moved away from the hero numbers as they described it and gone with a more realistic, whether this is realistic depends on your point of view, but at least it's kind of giving you a little bit of an idea of where we're at performance. So you can see on the left, we've got 5200 1U, 7300 2U, 9500 4U. But then we can see like the jumps in the drives, 12, 24, and 48. So you can see that we're doubling up each time, but then performance slightly different. But you can kind of see again, we're kind of starting to increase and step up each time. It kind of gives you an idea of how to position those systems. So one thing I'd like you to kind of have in your mind when we're looking at the calculator tool is there's a difference between the 52 and the 73. So you can see the drives obviously double, but the performance is nearly double too. So have a think about that when we're looking at the pricing of the particular boxes. So it give you an idea of how you can position it to your customer. You can see that actually, because we've IBM have increased the power and I suppose just the power of the 7300. It shows that actually previously we had a bit of a crossover between the 7200 and the 52, whereas now the 73 is clearly double, well, effectively double what we are as a 52, which is all good. So calculator tool, onto the real thing. This is what we're all about today. Bear with me.
So we did have a question from
all right, cool.
Stephen about the pricing on Flash 73 and 9500s versus earlier versions, and we'll touch on that once we've just shown you what the 7300 pricing looks like in the tool.
Yeah, okay, cool. Right, so this is our wonderful Flash System 5200, 7300 cost calculator. So our version, we only had the 5200 here, so now we've added in the 7300 for enhanced flexibility. I'm not going to go through all the instructions, but essentially the key takeaway is that we've got a system configured for you already. It's an opinionated configuration. It gets you to a price quicker. What I would say about this tool, which I need to highlight every single time, is that this is an estimated tool. It will give you a rough price of what you'd expect to see. Is it a formal quotation? No, it's not. But it will give you a rough guide of saying, well, how much is this going to be? How much is it going to cost? And that's where you kind of need to gauge it with your customer and then say, well, let's get a formal quote and then wrap it up properly. But it's kind of to give you that quick pricing tool, nothing else further. So if I go into the 5200 section, we basically have a number of tabs here. We have 5200 and we have 73. So they're both exactly the same format as what we've laid out before. One of the most important tools and most valuable parts of the tool is the drive recommendation tool. So I'm going to kind of go through a couple of scenarios and then step it up each time and see how we go. So quite often we get customers coming to us saying, well, I have a requirement for X terabytes. How much is that going to be? And this is the tool to answer that question. Or say you might have a competitive price for a HPE unit or a Dell box or whatever, and you want to compete with that. So this kind of gives you an idea of how quick and easy it is for IBM to compete. So if I start really what I see as quite a small number actually, you can see that if you look to put in a 30 terabyte one, which is kind of quite an entry level proposition, you can see that actually it starts to recommend different drives based on cost for you to actually configure. And what we've done with the drives is that, of course, IBM have flash core modules. Flash core modules, 2-for-1. So what we've done is calculated it out as 2-for-1 compression on each of the flash core modules. So you can see in this particular scenario that we've got 30 terabytes. But to do 30 terabytes, we could either look at using 11 3.84s. So if I put 3.84s, and that gives you a price. But of course, we're just using regular SSDs, regular media. So we're not using any compression. But you can see the problem with that is that we're actually starting to use all the drive slots. We've only got one drive slot free. So perhaps the better way would be to kind of look at, well, what does the flash core modules look like? So we can see they've got a cost of around about 24 grand. If we go to use the flash core modules, because we have data reduction and built, we can use less of them. And still, we're a little bit more. Don't get me wrong, it is a bit more, but you can see actually we've got 7 drive slots used. So if they were looking to expand in the future, it is much easier for them to do so.
And effectively, it's probably under 10% extra cost for an extra 20% effective capacity as well, because it was 30.72 versus 38.4. So this is a much more future-proofed solution. And effectively, the compression on the flash core modules is free of performance impact.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is the drive recommendation tool gives you the cheapest option, but we do need to apply a little bit of knowledge to think, well, what is the customer scenario that we're addressing? Is that box going to be sat in place and not going to grow, which is probably unlikely for a lot of our customers, or are they expecting to add growth? So we don't want to be topping out a 5200 straight away. So if I start to kind of move up the chain and look at 150 terabytes, as you can see that all of a sudden all the regular flash drives start to drop off, because that's where the flash core modules, because we're getting 2-for-1 out of them, the cost per terabyte is much better. So you can see in this particular recommendations, it's looking at 11 9.6s or 7 19.2s. Again, it would depend on your customer requirements. Say, well, if it's never going to grow beyond 11, where you've still got a slot free, not perfect, but okay. But if you have 7 slots, you've got plenty slots free. So it kind of starts to give you a gauge of where you could potentially look and suggest things to the customer. And if we start to go even further to say 350 terabytes, we end up very much so at the larger end of the drives. And we don't have a lot of options on 5200 because we're running out of slots, aren't we? So we couldn't, for example, fit 350 terabytes using the 19s. So we have to go to the 38 drives.
And just to clarify one point on that, obviously this tool is designing for the NVMe internal 12 drive slots in the control enclosure. The flash systems have always had the capability still to add SAS-based expansion enclosures. So this isn't saying that they would always be limited to that, but in order for them to be growing beyond the 12 drives, they would have to have the ability to put the SAS expansion card in the controller and be happy to be tiering, even if it's to SSDs, in a SAS expansion enclosure. In my experience, having told you that's possible, I'm not selling expansion enclosures for NVMe systems. We're just solving for how do we get the capacity they want out of the control enclosure drive slots, because it tends to be 1, easier, and 2, probably cheaper if you're using flash core modules.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, Lee. I mean, for me, because we can do a huge amount of storage within the controller unit, unless you have a real need to break out that controller unit, I don't see it as necessary in a lot of scenarios. It's just a case of making sure that we've got the right spec in the beginning to do that. And this gives us an idea of how we can do it. Also within the tool, you've probably noticed that we've got spectrum control included here is 3 years, and you can put it to none if you wish to do so, but it does have a reminder if you want to use safeguarded copy, make sure you're adding spectrum control. So what we've done is we've used spectrum control select edition, which is done per enclosure, so it makes it much simpler to calculate and much easier to do. So of course, every time you're adding the SAS expansion, as Lee would describe, you'd actually be adding a licensing cost too. So with this, it's kind of really quite a simple way to do it. Back to my kind of capacity required terabytes. So you can see here the 5200, when we get to around about 350 terabytes, our only option is to look at the 38 terabyte drives. But if we switch over to the 7300.
Actually, Mike, before we bounce over, can we just do one last thing on the 5200?
Absolutely.
So if you can make that as per the drive recommendation tool, so the 38.4s, what I want to point out to people is a bit of a nuance that I've used to sell bigger solutions. So if you look at that, we've asked for 350, the effective capacity is 384. And if we add one more drive and we do that up front, we're effectively still doing DRAID 6, but we've increased the stripe width that we're writing the data at by 1. So we don't get a fraction of the drive, or if we're going to get a fraction of the drive, it's 99 out of 100th of the drive. And if you compare and contrast that with effectively getting 5/7 of a drive, where if you add it at a later time, it's a very effective way of discovering if a customer's got some extra budget. Because if you say you can spend X now and get nearly 100% of the benefit, or you can spend X later and you'll get 5/7 of the benefit, that opens up conversations where customers say, actually, yeah, give me a quote for 9, 10, and actually 12 drives. And I'm not making that up. Last summer, I got a customer to go from 9 38.4s to 12 on 2 boxes, because they could see that they would rather get 3 times 38.4 flash cores usable than a fraction of it. So it's just a little trick to make your deals bigger and to validate whether the customer's giving you a hard time on money because they're giving you a hard time or because they don't have any more.
Yeah, because usually I find that the customers come to us with I want to have so many terabytes, but then when they realise that when they see the IBM pricing, they're usually quite surprised that it's quite cost effective, quite cheap, and they go, "Hang on, I've got a budget for this," which they won't, which they'll be thinking in their head, but they don't tell you. They go, "Well, what does an extra drive look like?" And we can do that. So it's kind of quite simple to say, well, if you've got a configuration, what does that extra drive look like? We can price it up straight away, which is all goodness. So yeah, we do see customers adding on an extra drive because they're getting that effective capacity going up and up, which is all good. But they're keeping within the envelope of where we are, so it's all good. So if I just move on to the 7300, we have exactly the same scenario here. As you see, what did I put in over here? 350. If I put in 350 over here, we have exactly the same. I suppose we have exactly the same metrics of what we've done previously on the 5200, but because we have 24 drive slots, we're throwing up lots of different options, which is all good. So you can see that because we've got 24 drives, we can actually start to look at the lower capacity modules too. So we can actually look at the 12 and been able to do it that way. So we can start to kind of really start to change things of where we're going. Bear with me. I'm wrong drive. There we go.
So how's that compare against the 52 price for 838.4s, Mike?
Yep. So if you go back to the 52, so that's 100K thereabouts.
Yeah, that's for 10 drives.
Oh, sorry, hang on. Yeah, sorry, I fiddled with it. So that's 83. So if you go back to my chart at the beginning where we're saying, well, the 7300 has double the capacity and almost double the performance, it's not double the price, which is worth kind of investigating out where your crossover point is and where that growth for that customer and what they want to do with that. And if you can actually start to look at that system and think, well, what, do your performance metrics, do your store modeling, and actually see, well, is that going to fit for that particular client or not? So you can start to really think about it in different ways.
So one thing, there's a big red outlined white arrow on the 7300 calculator, and it's because the maths on the optimizing drive recommendation tool is challenging, to say the very least. It's easy to go one way, it's harder to calculate it from the other direction without the input conditions. So if you see, I've asked for 350 and it's told me 1219.2s. Actually, when you do the maths on it, having with the input, it says it's 343.65, assuming 2-to-1 compression. FCM3s could do 3-to-1. But realistically, that's why it's now got this big red arrow, validate capacity versus requirements here. So you have to look at that 350 and say, have I got 350 effective capacity, or do I want to put an extra drive in?
Yeah.
That's what that white bold arrow's for, and validate calculated capacity versus requirements here.
Yeah, I mean, we've been quite conservative with the calculations. So just be wary of that, I suppose, is the best thing to understand and check those calculations. But it gives you that good rough idea of where we're at. I say in this particular system, we've done a very similar well, for what we view as an opinionated configuration. We've put in the 32 gig adapters and encryption and the cache upgrade to get it to 768. So of course, in the 73, you could add more adapter cards, which kind of brings me on to we've added an extra tab onto the configuration tool, and we're deciding whether we should add another tab further beyond this for competitive information, which is going to be which we may do over the next version or so. But we've added positioning around the 52 and the 73. We've done very much so a factual element here, which is kind of a usual sort of matrix from IBM. It's almost like it's been done by an IBM, isn't that rightly? Very, very factual over here. But then we've got, I suppose, a few tips to consider when to propose the 7300. Thinking about the capacity increases, thinking about are you adding safeguarded copy on top of an already highly performing array? Well, if you've gone for a 52 originally, maybe you should start to look at a 73 to make sure that you're going to be able to perform two alongside safeguarded copy. And of course, like host ports, again, that's kind of like a factual element. But we need to think about future proofing. Are we going to use data reduction beyond flash core modules? It's kind of understanding those wider concepts with your customer to make sure that you're covering them off. Okay.
Excellent. I'm mindful about the time, so
yes,
I'm going to go back to the question that Stephen asked. I'm hoping you're still with us. So basically, Stephen said was, have we got any feeling on pricing on FS73 and FS95 versus earlier versions? And what I've said is on the 9500, I don't think we've got enough of a view on that one yet. But fundamentally, my observations on the 7300 versus 7200 would be, following the price change on the 7200, the 7300 is the same cost or lower than a 7200 if you're putting advanced expert care on the 7300 and a service pack on the 7200, it's probably lower cost. So it's also worth reiterating the 7200 machine type 2076 took service packs, or go on a service suite, or you could do a CMDA special bid. That's how we used to do those things. There was an expert care machine type, but no one used it. The Flash 7300 is expert care only. And that's where effectively you pick the number of years of support you want as per the slides that Mike showed at the start. There's basic, advanced, or premium levels, and they have different cost uplifts. But that's how we do the pricing. And my observation is, I did a price for a customer or for a partner who's on this call, and the price difference for a 7300 to a 7200 was approximately £2,000, which we thought was pretty good value. And then I had a moment of clarity. We hadn't put any warranty uplift on the 7200, but the 7300 had 3 years, 24/7. So go and change anything you've quoted as a 7200. If you quoted it before the 8th of February, the pricing's out of date anyway, so you need to go back around it. But position the 7300 because it's probably better commercially, it's better technically, it's more future-proofed. Customer gets FCM3s, it's more differentiated.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, we are tight on time now. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask now. When are you going to get a copy of this? I hear you ask. I will send you a copy of this after the call with the replay of the call. So you'll have it at your fingertips straight away, which is all good. If you do have any questions that you'd like to ask us now, happy to have them. Or if you want to drop me an email, happy to do so too, not a problem. I appreciate everybody has a busy day of Zooms and this, that, and the other. But hopefully this is a really helpful tool to enable you to sell, and it'll enable you to price things up really quickly to get that rough idea and engage with clients really, really rapidly. And what we tend to find is that it's really helpful when you've got competing products. Let's face it, we're seeing a lot of products on constraint, difficult to get hold of. IBM's product line has been pretty strong with that. So it's good to make sure that we're competing out the existing clients. Is there a link for the tool? I'll send it on to you. It's a spreadsheet, Andy, so I'll send it over to you. Fine. Cool. Save me a ton of time. Excellent. That's what it's designed to do. So yeah. Excellent. Lee, any closing comments before I stop record? I think we're all good, but yeah, go on.
Please use the tool or we'll force you to listen to us again.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of one of my questions for everybody. If they want to see more Zoom calls from TechData, we're happy to set them up, do them. I used to do like random Zoom calls around a different technology stack every week or so. I probably wouldn't go to doing that again. But maybe if you want to see a safeguarded copy demo run out of our tech zone, let me know, and maybe we could set that up and get everybody on a Zoom call and run through it with you if you've never seen it. I don't know how popular or useful that would be, because I appreciate everybody has hours of content and stuff to watch these days. But yeah, we can certainly do that if you wish to do so. It's not a problem. Okay, right. I'm going to stop my share and stop my recording.
Thank you, Mark. Peter speaking from Switzerland.